So let's get right into it. When you think about Coldplay, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it the big stadium anthems, the emotional ballads, or maybe it's some of the criticism they've gotten over the years? Well, for this explainer, I want you to think about them as something totally different. One of the most successful, most durable, and just brilliantly engineered institutions of the 21st century. And it all kicks off with this central, kind of crazy paradox.
I mean, just look at this. On one side, you've got the criticism that has followed them for decades. Noel Gallagher famously called their music bedwetter music, which is harsh. But then on the other side, you have the cold, hard, undeniable reality. Their latest tour, it's the first by any group to gross over $1 billion. They were the first band to ever hit 100 million monthly listeners on Spotify. The numbers are they're absolutely staggering.
So that's the big question, right? How does a band that people love to call inoffensive achieve such complete and total global domination? Well, it's not some happy accident. No way. It's a blueprint. And it's built on 3 very specific and, believe me, very powerful secret ingredients.
Okay, ingredient number 1. And here's the thing. It has almost nothing to do with their music. It's all about the internal structure, the architecture they built from day one, back when they were just kids at University College London. It's the boring stuff, right? The stuff that prevents bands from completely imploding. And Coldplay, well, they perfected it.
They basically created a band constitution, getting inspiration from groups like U2 and REM. And the rules, while they seem simple, were actually radical for a young band. All profits split evenly 4 ways. Every song, all 4 members get songwriting credits. They had a strict zero-tolerance policy on hard drugs, and, from the very beginning, a commitment to donate 10% of their income to charity. This internal democracy, it just preemptively solved the 2 big things that kill most bands: fighting over money and fighting over ego.
And then you have the secret weapon, Phil Harvey, the official 5th member. He was their friend, their first manager. But the stress got so intense that he had to take a 4-year break to go study psychology. Think about that. He came back with a clinical understanding of group dynamics, basically becoming the band's therapist and creative guide. That role has been absolutely crucial to their incredible stability.
All right, so that's ingredient 1. Let's move on to number 2, and you'll see how this all builds. With that stable foundation locked in, they were free to really focus on the music. But here's the key. They didn't just write songs. They strategically reinvented their sound over and over and over again to make sure they stayed on top. You can pretty much map their entire career across these 3 distinct eras, right? They started with that classic melancholic sound of parachutes and a rush of blood to the head, but just when they were starting to get a little stale with X and Y, they brought in the legendary producer Brian Eno for a complete artistic reset. And from that point on, they pivoted hard into global pop, which made sure they would absolutely dominate the streaming era.
Brian Eno's mandate was the catalyst for everything. He told them every song must sound distinct, and he completely shattered their comfort zone. All of a sudden, Chris Martin was singing in a lower register, they were recording in Spanish churches, and the lyrics went from personal stuff to these grand historical themes. Viva La Vida wasn't just a new album, it was a total rebirth. It created a band that was suddenly unafraid to take massive artistic risks.
In this reinvention, it led directly to their next big move: strategic collaboration. See, to stay relevant in the age of streaming, they started working with the biggest names in pop. Teaming up with Rihanna, Beyoncé, the Chainsmokers, and later BTS, that wasn't selling out. No, it was a super smart, calculated move to modernize their sound and tap into entirely new global audiences. And man, did it work. My Universe with BTS gave them their first ever #1 debut in the US.
Okay, this brings us to the final ingredient, and honestly, this might be the most important piece of their modern brand. At some point, they decided their mission wasn't just to be the biggest band in the world, but to be the most sustainable.
59%. Just let that number sink in. That's the MIT-verified reduction in their tour's direct CO2 emissions. I mean, think about that for a second. They actually paused touring for 2 years just to figure out how to do it sustainably. And doing so, they set a completely new gold standard for the entire music industry.
And the way they did it is through some incredible innovation. They're powering their shows with recycled BMW car batteries. They install kinetic floors and power bikes, so the audience is literally generating electricity just by dancing and cycling. Even those famous light-up wristbands that everyone loves, they're now plant-based, they're compostable, and they're reused every single night.
But their mission goes even further than just reducing their own footprint. For every single ticket sold, and that's over 7 million so far, they plant a tree. They've diverted 72% of their tour waste from landfills, and they're funding technology that actually pulls plastic out of rivers. They've turned their entire brand into a vehicle for real, tangible, large-scale environmental restoration.
So, you put all that together? What does it lead to? Well, when you've built an indestructible internal structure, mastered the art of evolution, and redefined your entire industry's environmental responsibilities, you get to the final stage. You get to consciously and deliberately craft your own legacy.
And they're doing this with something called a Ulysses contract. It's basically a pact you make with your future self. Chris Martin has said, very publicly, that the band will stop making new albums after their 12th record. And you might ask, why would they do that? Simple, to protect their legacy. By setting a clear endpoint, they're making sure the quality stays incredibly high and that they don't just fizzle out.
And they've even got the end all mapped out. After 2024's Moon Music, they're planning to release a musical-style album and then their final record. It's going to be a self-titled Homecoming, which sounds like a return to their roots. It is the final, deliberate act in a career that has been defined by intention. This isn't just an ending, it's a curation.
So it all comes down to this, really. When you combine a democratic structure with strategic evolution and a core mission that's way bigger than yourself, you create something that's more than just a band. You create a blueprint. Which leaves us with one final thought. Is this model, the Coldplay model, the future of sustainable success? Not just in music, but for any organization, any company looking to build a truly lasting legacy.